Hey there, welcome to Pickled Parables. This podcast is presented by Parable Ministries as a Bible teaching resource. Thank you for joining us. Pickled Parables is a podcast about taking in and living out the Bible. Here we will study, contemplate, and testify to the Bible's incredible teachings and how it leads us to live better lives. To stay up to date with all things Parable, follow us on Instagram at parable_ministries and visit our website at parableministries.com. We hope today's message finds you well.
Oh my goodness. Hello. Welcome to Pickled Parables. My name is Jesse. I am joined by my co-host, Hunter Hoover. Hunter, say hello.
Hello. How are you guys?
They say that they are well. Thank you for joining us today.
Or they're sad, you know.
Oh.
Sorry. Go ahead, Jesse.
If you're sad, please message us at jesse@parableministries.com and we will make you feel better. Today we are presenting a new God and Sinner episode, and Hunter will be presenting a character from, I believe, 2 Samuel. So I'll let Hunter take it off from here, and I will pop in every now and then.
Yeah. So Jesse and I are taking turns on this, and I'm up. And so I kind of went back and forth, just a little peek behind the curtain here. It's like a stage curtain. Anyway, it's not a different type of curtain. Anyway, but I was like going back and forth on like, what do I do? And I don't want to say who the other person is yet, because I'm letting it marinate. But in my just total transparency, my Bible reading just went through this story. And I realized that as I'm not listening, I'm truly sitting and trying to read it and follow it, just like, this is not supplemental. This is a special time. And I realized that I knew this person's name and I've heard the story, but there's a lot of details that I didn't like key in on really. And so today for God and Sinners, we're going to talk about Absolom. And if you hear that and you're like, I feel like I've heard that name, you probably have. He usually gets mentioned when people talk about King David. And he usually gets tacked on as like this strange section of King David's life that is very rightfully so characterized by hardship and honestly family and political and financial and personal turmoil for King David. And so if you want to read, and I'm going to read portions of Absolom's story, but if you want to read his story, it really kind of starts at the beginning of 2 Samuel. We find out in 2 Samuel chapter 3 that Absolom is likely the third son of David. That is the assumption based on like the order of which kids are listed, and that he was born to Maacah or jury's out on how many, how do you say all these A's in this name? But she is the daughter of Talmai, king of Gesher. We'll get back to that in just a little while. But he is described as very handsome. We've heard this story before.
David.
He is David, Saul
2.0.
Yeah. So we're going to see a pattern that's going to arise. We're going to see a number of literary patterns that pop up in Absolom's story. The Bible is very
patterns. Yeah,
the Bible's very good. Not just as a book that I care very much about as a Christian, but also if you can hang with sometimes dense Jewish Hebrew literature, there's some wild story going on. But he is also described as having long hair.
Samson?
So there's a lot of connections. And he is going to... So to tell you the story, he's the third son of King David. And these events take place after the birth of Solomon, to my understanding, in reading. Like, Solomon is born at the end of 2 Samuel 12, and the events that are detailed about Absolom's life begin in 2 Samuel 13. So I've heard an argument that argues that it did a time jump. I'm not convinced of that. I think Solomon Samuel's long dead by this point. I am convinced that Solomon has been born, but is a kid and is being raised by his mother Bathsheba primarily, because David, as we're going to find out, is going to be running amok a bit. So the story starts really kind of in an awful, frustrating way. This might be a good time, listener, to tell you that Absalom's story contains conversations related to sexual violence and the like. So
we're probably gonna have to put a little E on this episode.
Yeah, I'm gonna do my best to make it family friendly. But at some point, there's no way to make some very egregious sin family friendly. It is the nature of sin that it tends to not be family friendly. And so Absalom's story, thankfully, and in many ways thankfully, Absalom does not commit this egregious sin himself. That is one note about the man Absalom. But it starts out, so Absalom's full sister is named Tamar. And I say full sister because David had multiple wives and he had various children with multiple different women. But Absalom and Tamar are like full brother and sister. Same dad, same mom, Maacah of Geshur. And Tamar's described as this very beautiful lady. Absalom's this handsome guy. Seems like some pretty good genes going on there. But Tamar is so beautiful that her half-brother, Amnon, who is David's son from another woman, must have Tamar, not as a wife, not as anything, but as his sexual object, for lack of a better way of saying it. And so he constructs a plan using members of David's court and David's house to help him pretend to be sick and have her assigned to the duty of attending him while he's ill. And it culminates in Amnon raping his half-sister Tamar. You know, not an accident. That's a pretty intentional move. And it's an awful move, and it's a move that rightfully angers Absalom, the full brother of Tamar. In his brain, you know, it's like the only connection is dad. Dad, King David, is the only person that connects us all. And he's sitting here, and this was very common for royalty back then, to have this multiplicity of wives and these very complex and complicated families. I think it was something that maybe God's king, whoever that was going to be, was supposed to have avoided in some ways. David seems to not have done that. And we're seeing kind of the end results play out in Amnon, Absalom, and Tamar's story. Tamar... Oh, and I should know, it's finally David that ultimately sends Tamar to do this. So, like, there's a lot of politics moving around, but David is the one, and this is 2 Samuel 13:7. It says, David sent home to Tamar, saying, go to your brother Amnon's house and prepare food for him. And so Tamar does an obedient daughter, and like when the king tells you to do something, you go do it. And she goes and attends this, and it seems pretty innocent at first, but then Amnon's kind of a gross bad weirdo. And he decides that he needs to have sex with his essentially sister. I will note, this does break God's law. I want to get the right passage. Leviticus 18. Oh, so it's in the line of a big long list of various people that you should not have sexual relations with. But you shall not uncover the nakedness. This is 18:10. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your son's daughter, of your daughter's daughter. The nakedness is your own. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your father's wife's daughter, which is exactly what Amnon did. His father's wife's daughter. In other words, his half-sister, or in some cases, this can be read as your sister-in-law. Either way, if you needed God's law to tell you not to do that, it does in fact say it. So Amnon... common sense and God's word would tell you should not have done this. But Amnon does this, and then, not only that, he humiliates Tamar. Like, he has these relations with her, and then he sends her out. It says that after he does it, he hates her. Like, he is... I think he's got some self-guilt. And you might hear this, you're like, man, Hunter really misspoke in the beginning. He said he's talking about Absalom, but Amnon is this awful, terrible person. Yes, Amnon is bad. Amnon doesn't get a lot of screen time, and he is really a catalyst to launch Absalom's story. I will note, and this is something that Jesse noted as I was, is Tamar is the name of, I want to say, Judah's sister from Genesis.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And Judah and Tamar, and no, is it Judah's daughter-in-law? I can't remember. But in Genesis, there is another person named Tamar, and she also undergoes a similar but different, for lack of a better saying it, negative interaction with her father. Yes. Yep. So Judah, his daughter-in-law was named Tamar, and his son died, and he failed to find a husband via his sons, and eventually did not follow through in finding her a husband, and eventually he comes to sleep with Tamar. Long story short, the name Tamar, I was joking with Jesse before, but I'm half serious, is every time it pops up, it's oh no, here we go again. Please don't. And it happens again. And it's really unfortunate that this keeps happening around and to people with the name Tamar. But I do believe that it's intentional. I don't think it was we changed the name. I just think it's one of those things that God in his word has used to help us draw connections of how this sin, it carries over when it's undealt with over time and in history. It's also the propensity for people to fall into similar sin that when you hear about it, when you hear about someone raping their half-sister, you think, how could that possibly happen? And it's a reminder that sin is incredibly awful, and when we do not heed the good direction that we have from God, we tend very, very quickly toward sin. But in revenge / in frustration at his own dad for not dealing with it, Absalom kills Amnon via this kind of deception with his dad, where he has his, he's hey, we need to shear the sheep and have Amnon come out. And, I think David kind of has a little inclination that Absalom's mad, because he kind of wants to pump the brakes on it. He says, why should he go with you? But Absalom pressed him until he let Amnon and the king's sons go. And so then he says, when Absalom commanded, when Amnon's heart is merry with wine, they're going to get him drunk. And when I say to you, strike Amnon, then kill him. Do not fear, for I have commanded you. So he, Absalom, the king's son, commands the king's men, or his brothers maybe. It's the stories but he commands other people to kill his half-brother Amnon for the sins that he committed. And the question here is, should Absalom have done that? Probably not. Only because really David as king is the one who should have taken responsibility in this moment. He should have, when he found out about what Amnon did, say, hey, sorry, partner, you are not without guilt, and you do have to atone for this in some way, whether it's making it right with Tamar, or you are not going to be included in the family structure. But David seems pretty content to keep Amnon around, so much so that when Absalom wants him to go out and be a part of this, David's like, why? You better not kill him, Absalom, you know what I'm saying? And that is exactly what happens. I think that's what's behind David's heart there. But news comes to David that Absalom has killed Amnon, but the runner, it doesn't tell them who says it. Jonadab's the one that sets the record straight. But somebody reports to David that all of his kids are dead and Absalom killed them. And Jonadab's the one that shows up and it's like, no, just Amnon is dead. And Absalom's been planning this for some time, David. You need to need to get sorted out. So from this, Absalom runs away from home. He runs away from King David. He flees, and he flees to Geshur. I'm going to take a brief note to jump back to the beginning. Geshur is where his mom is from, and very likely has gone back to live there. So he kind of flees to grandpa, Absalom does, because David married Maacah, or I don't know, Maacah. Listener, if you Maacah, but David married her because she was the princess to the king. And so Absalom flees to this foreign people. Geshur, back in the book of Judges and Joshua, is one of the peoples that Israel was supposed to have driven out of the land, and they failed to do so. They actually allowed them to stay. The Geshurites are mentioned in Joshua 13. I'm going to read this to you. So Joshua 13 details a little bit about this people. It says, "This is the land that yet remains, all the regions of the Philistines and all those of the Geshurites, from Shihor, which is east of Egypt, northward to the boundary of Ekron." And then we find out later that it seems like they never drove them out of the place, because David is cutting deals with them and marrying their princesses by his story. There's something to be said there about the nature of the book of Joshua, which is a whole nother podcast. But Absalom flees to Geshur, where his maternal grandfather is king. And this is a group of people that should not even really be in the region. If Israel as a people had listened to God's commands, it's almost like God could see down the line a bit. But if they had listened to God's commands, which was, listen, you need to, if the people are willing to truly become people of God, we see that happen countless times in Scripture, and I think many of the Geshurites would have been welcomed in. But if they're not, God's like, they need to be driven from the land, because this section is set apart for my use and for my people, because y'all are set apart. Absalom flees there. It's a place that really shouldn't, like, the fact that it exists is kind of a reminder that they have failed to follow God's commands yet again. Also, it's just like ironic and poetic that Absalom is like the great grand whatever of this people that Joshua failed to drive away. Like, they have intermarried, which is another thing that they were encouraged not to do. Because it often led to idol worship and other things. And so he flees to Geshur, and David is sad. He's sad for Amnon. But he also, like, it's important to understand, David doesn't hate Absalom. And this is something that I think proves true throughout the entire story, is he wants Absalom to come home. He does. But he doesn't do what he needs to do to make that happen. So, another character named Joab, he is kind of like a chief officer for David, a military ruler. He does a lot of the political underhandedness for David a lot of times. But he sees the distress that David's in, and he, through envoys and visiting, convinces Absalom to return to Jerusalem. This is after a period of 3 years. And so Absalom returns to Jerusalem, but King David, does not allow Absalom counsel with him. He will not meet with Absalom. And this is one of those weird things, because David is like seemingly upset that Absalom has run away to Geshur and wants him home. But then when Absalom comes home, David is like, okay, I'm glad you're home, but I'm not talking to you. Like, I'm and in this, looking at Absalom, we have this conversation about, like, David's short fallings as a king. David had many short fallings. He was a man after God's own heart. The word tells us that. But even that person had many shortcomings as leader and king. And primary in these is his failure to do the thing that he ought to do with his kids in these moments. He fails to lead his family, really, is one of David's chief failures. He lives 2 years, so Absalom's in Jerusalem. This is chapter 14, verse 28. He lives 2 full years in Jerusalem without coming into the king's presence. And then Absalom sends for Joab, and he's the one that like orchestrated everything to get him to be able to come back. He sends for Joab and asks that Joab help him come into David's chamber, like help smooth things over with Dad. And Joab refuses to see Absalom. And this goes on twice. And then Absalom decides, okay, I'm going to set Joab's field on fire. That'll get his attention. And in this, you have and I'm not saying it's a direct connection. I'm just saying it's a convenient connection. You have this long-haired, handsome man setting fields on fire. It resonates with Samson's story where he ties the fox's tails with the torches and he sets the Philistines' fields on fire. In this case, it's his dad's very close advisor, Joab. This gets Joab's attention, and he finally he says, "Why have I come from Geshur? It would be better for me to still be there. Let me go into the presence of the king, and if there is guilt in me, let him put me to death." Absalom's putting it all on the line. He's like, listen, either I'm guilty and I deserve to die, or Dad needs to move on. He needs to get over it. And I think he's kind of right. Absalom killed his brother because David, the king, didn't step into that role, and he should have. And Absalom was on the hook for it. And so he finally comes to the king, and the king welcomes Absalom, and it says that he kisses him. And then begins the part where it seems like they've made up, and but now Absalom goes on conspiracy mode. And he begins to gather horses and begins to enlist people in the military, and gathers, and the words is he got himself chariots and horses and 50 men to run before him. And in the warning in Deuteronomy about future kings, large amounts of wealth, multiplicity of wives, and large chariots with many horses were things that kings were not supposed to have. And so that Absalom is beginning to accumulate those things is no, bad. Don't do it. But he does it. And he eventually, the way Absalom's conspiracy plays out is he goes out into the gate of the city, and as people would come and go from the city, he would call out to them and say, hey, you know how King David never has time to hear any of your concerns because he's so busy being king? You can bring all your concerns over here to me, and I will hear your disputes, and I will settle your disputes. The king's son, me, Absalom, the very handsome one with long hair, and look at my good chariot that I'm building. You can come and bring all your problems over here. In doing this, it says, so Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. He wins the people over with his charisma and his good looks. He was a hunk. No. And he sells it. And what's interesting is they kind of buy it. Because he tells his dad, let me go away. I made a vow to the Lord in Hebron. I need to go. And I vowed this while I lived at Geshur. And so his dad says, go in peace. But while he goes, he sends secret messengers out throughout the tribes and says, as soon as you hear this sound, all of you are going to say, Absalom is king at Hebron. And so he does this. And what's weird is it kind of works. He does kind of get called king for a while. And part of that is because a messenger comes to David and says, hey, the people are a big fan of Absalom. So much so that like he's getting ready to overthrow you as king. And so David and his family and his servants get up and they run away. They flee from the city. The king goes out and all his household. The king left 10 concubines to keep the house. Again, why we got so many, David? And the king, and how do you think Solomon learned these things? Anyway, and the king went out and all the people after him, and they halted at the last house. Yes.
I just wanted to make an observation of something where Absalom, where the people are clamoring for Absalom, and David is the one who runs away. Seems like an inversion of when the people were clamoring for David, and then Saul gets upset and David runs away. That seems kind of related, doesn't it?
Yeah. What's interesting is David is the one who runs in both. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It is a good connection. I think it's a valuable connection, and it's going to prove to be a very, not only Jesse, so this is the best part. Not only is it a connection that you have made and that I am convinced we would make as readers of the Bible, it's a connection that the author gets ready to make for us.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So David flees, and this is so then the king said to Ittai the Gittite. So he says, "Why do you also go with us? Go back and stay with the king." David calls Absalom the king. "Go back and stay with the king, for you're a foreigner and an exile in your home. You came only yesterday, and shall I today make you wander about with us, since I know not where? Go back, take your brothers with you, and may the Lord show steadfast love and faithfulness to you." But Ittai answered the king, "As the Lord lives, and as my lord the king lives, wherever my lord the king shall be, whether for life or death, there also your servant will be." So there's this man called Ittai the Gittite.
And like Ruth.
Mm-hmm. It's very like, no, that's, and he is specifically listed as a foreigner. All the Cherethites, Pelethites, and 600 Gittites followed him from Gath. And so he is one of these. And David's like, go, you can have a good life over here. I'm going to be wandering out in the wilderness. I'm back to this game. I'm an old man now. The running away from not foreign kings, that game's old. But here I am getting ready to do it, and I guarantee you don't want to join me. And Ittai is like, "No, I'm pretty convinced that you're the Lord's anointed, and I'm going to follow you to death or otherwise." And so they move and they cross the Kidron Valley and they pass toward the wilderness. Inside of the city, they are making plans for the ark. So one of the things that happens in 1st and 2nd Samuel is we play a game of where's the ark of the Lord. And they say, "Carry the ark back into the city. If I have found favor in the eyes of the Lord, he will bring me back and let me see both it and its dwelling place." David says, and this is one of the few times in the book of 1st and 2nd Samuel. It's one book in the Hebrew Scriptures, but it's one of the few times that we see a king not tote the ark out to solve a conflict for them. David goes, no, take it back, let it dwell in the city, and if it is God's will for me to return and see it in God's dwelling place, so be it. And if not, I'm good with that too. That's kind of the heart of it. And this is one of those moments where I'm like, I think David gets it a little bit. Like though he has failed as to lead well in some instances, I think he got this right, this sending the ark back. As David went up and he ascends the Mount of Olives, and all the people are with him. And while David was coming to the summit where God was worshipped, Hushai the Archite came to meet with him. There's all sorts of ites that go out to David. A lot of foreigners going out to meet David and be with him. David said to him, "If you go on with me, you'll be a burden. But if you return to the city and say to Absalom, I will be your servant, O king," he sends this man Hushai, David's friend, back to the city to dwell with Absalom. And he arrives like almost at the same time. And so that's David runs away. Now's for the juice. So David, and you're like, wait, where's Absalom? We're going to get to him in a second. David, when his best friend Jonathan died, we find out later on in his story that Jonathan had a disabled son named Mephibosheth. Well, it turns out Mephibosheth had he's still in the game in some ways. But it says, Ziba, the servant of Mephibosheth, met him with a couple of donkeys saddled, bearing 200 loaves of bread, and 100 bunches of raisins, and 100 of summer fruits, and a skin of wine. And the king said to Ziba, why have you brought these? This is 2 Samuel 16. The donkey, and he says, the donkeys are for the king's household to ride, the bread and summer fruit for the young men to eat, and the wine for those who faint in the wilderness to drink. And so we see Mephibosheth, this disabled kid that honestly their culture had written off because he's unable to fend for himself. And David said, no, you will always have a spot at my table. I made a promise to Jonathan. I'm keeping it through the person of Mephibosheth. We see Mephibosheth here return the favor as he sends out provisions to David and his people as they get ready to enter pretty much exile. And it's this reminder that they are not family, technically, like David married in, sort of, but that's like Saul's grandson, the one that was trying to get David killed and chasing him around. And Mephibosheth isn't trying to usurp David, but his own son Absalom is. And there's this like stark parallel drawn between how Mephibosheth treats David and how Absalom does. David says, behold, to Ziba, he says, behold, all that belonged to Mephibosheth is now yours. So it seems like something has happened, and he puts the care of these things. He's like, I'm returning the stuff. It's Mephibosheth's. Like, he honors Saul's family, even though Saul is king, isn't king anymore, even though Saul did all this wicked stuff and chased David around, David is content to honor Saul's legacy kind of through Mephibosheth. Then we meet a character, and this is the sinner that I spoke of. We could talk about this one for a bit. But in short, his name is Shimei, or Shimei, Shimei. And his only like thing that he does is he curses David. And he like berates David and his men. They're throwing rocks at him. They're chasing him out of the hills. Pretty whack. But what the interesting thing about Shimei is he says, the Lord has, he's saying this to David, the Lord has avenged on you the blood of the house of Saul, in whose place you've reigned, and the Lord has given the kingdom into the hand of your son. Evil is on you, for you're a man of blood. And we see this dichotomy of Mephibosheth and Shimei, where Mephibosheth, who is actually Saul's like grandson, is paying homage to David and providing for David, and Shimei is this Benjamite, which is also related to Saul, and is on this other side of things and is berating David, and he hasn't let go of the fact that we don't know the direct connection, but that somehow his family isn't king, and he actually curses David. What's interesting, and I'm going to get back to Absalom to finish his story very quickly, but this is what David says in regards to Shimei. Behold, my own son seeks my life. How much more now may this Benjamite? Leave him alone. Let him curse, for the Lord has told him to. It may be that the Lord will look on the wrong done to me, and the Lord will repay me with good for his cursing. It is a wildly theologically weird statement that David makes. But he essentially says, no, we're not killing Shimei for his rabble. In fact, go ahead and let him curse. Because if God has told him to, then good. I want him to do what God has told him to do. But if he has not, let him curse anyway, because maybe God will visit us with a blessing to kind of counteract the fact that this guy has cursed us and he wasn't supposed to. It's a strange theological move that David makes. It's also a very trusting move. It's like, hey, whether I'm blessed or cursed by whoever, I trust God in this. We see David being very good at trusting circumstances that are not necessarily outside of his control. Like, he's the king. He could just be like, no, kill him, get him, and make him stop doing this. I'm done. We're not going to have this. But he doesn't. He's like, no, let him curse. So David and his men went on the road. Shimei went along on the hillside and cursed as he went, and threw stones and flung dust. And the king and the people were with him, arrived weary at the Jordan. And so now we jump back to Absalom. He's in Jerusalem, and Hushai, David's friend, is there, and he comes to Absalom, and he's like, long live the king, all of this stuff. And Absalom's like, aren't you my dad's friend? What are you doing here? And Hushai lies. He says, no, for whom the Lord and his people and all men of Israel have chosen, his I will be, and with him I will remain. He's sleeper agent a little bit. So Absalom takes on his kingship. And here's where I believe Absalom, other than he overthrew his dad, which he should not have done. There's ways to solve our problems. Absalom seeks counsel from a man named Ahithophel. And Ahithophel, it's said that his word is as good as the Lord's. That's like, this guy is pretty important to their society. And he asks Ahithophel, so now that I'm king, how do I prove to everybody that I'm king? And he says, I know. You know all those concubines and stuff that your dad has? You're going to go sleep with them. And Absalom does it. And what's just, it's one of those things where I'm like, what set all of this in motion was the sexual sin of your brother, your half-brother. And only 5 to 6 years removed from that, you're so caught up in being mad at your dad or wanting to be king. I don't know if it's pride. I don't know if it's anger and vengeance. But whatever it is, Absalom's so caught up in it that he in many ways commits many of the same sins, maybe not to the most direct degree, but as he killed his half-brother for. Like, he essentially rapes his dad's concubines to prove his dominance over his dad's kingdom. And it says, and what's even wilder, and this is where, listener, sorry, but sometimes the Bible has some wild stuff. And I'm going to read this verse verbatim. In verse 2 Samuel 16:22, it says, so they, that is the people of Israel, pitched a tent for Absalom on the roof. And Absalom went into his father's concubines in the sight of all Israel. So, like, he did it semi-publicly. Like, yeah, he went into a tent, but, like, they specifically set up this tent for Absalom to commit this sin so that way they would know that he had beaten his dad, David. And we begin to see like things crumble a little bit for like the people's desire for doing what's right with the person of Absalom. A lot of it starts there. But David's friend, Hushai, ends up saving David. Hushai works through the priesthood and a number of women who seem to be faithful or seem to be frustrated with Absalom. And they went and tell King David to come on back because Ahithophel's counsel has been against you. So David arises and all. Okay, here we go. David arises and all the people with him. They crossed the Jordan by daybreak. None was left who had crossed it. And when Ahithophel saw that his counsel was not followed, he saddled his donkey and went off home to his own city. And you have this man who is given, like Ahithophel's the one that told Absalom to commit the sin with David's concubines. And when David hears of Ahithophel's bad counsel, he goes, nonsense, I'm going to not do that. And we see another parallel or another connection where David, even though Ahithophel is well known for his ability to give good counsel, that doesn't mean it's always good unless it's from God. And when he gives him counsel that is contrary, David ignores it, and Ahithophel flees. And so David comes in, Absalom crosses the Jordan, and there's actually kind of like a skirmish where David's men and Absalom's men are kind of at odds and are fighting with each other. David came to men. The people are hungry and weary and thirsty. And so it says, this is chapter 18, David mustered men who were with him and set over them commanders of thousands and hundreds. And David sent out the army, 1/3 under the commander of Joab. He's the dude that's like helping smooth a lot of things over. 1/3 under the command of Abishai, and another under the command of Ittai the Gittite. He gave him a promotion. Ittai the Gittite is listed as one of David's commanders when he is fleeing. And the king said, whatever seems best to you, I will do. And the king stood at the side of the gate while all his army marched out by hundreds. They didn't want him to go out. And the king ordered Joab and Abishai and Ittai, deal gently for my sake with Absalom. So he tells them, don't kill Absalom, deal gently with him. Like, even though we're going back out to essentially take the kingdom back, don't kill him. What's interesting is Absalom, while he's riding on his horse or his donkey, it says that his head gets caught in a branch. Like, figure it out. But like, his head gets caught in a branch, and it says that he is suspended between heaven and earth. And he's hanging there helpless. Literally hanging there. He's not like hung in the sense that he's suffocating. He's just stuck.
With his long hair?
No, like the way I understood it was like the branch caught him around the neck.
Oh,
and he's like stuck in the branch somehow. But these three men walk up, and a certain man sees it and tells Joab, behold, I saw Absalom hanging in an oak. And Joab says to him, you saw him? Why then did you not strike him down? I would have been glad to give you 10 pieces of silver. Huh? What did he say? Anyway, I would have been glad to give you 10 pieces of silver, and I would not reach out. But the man said, even if I felt in my hand the weight of 1,000 pieces of silver, I won't reach out my hand against the king's son. For in our hearing, the king commanded you and Abishai and Ittai to protect the young man Absalom. In response, Joab gets kill of the week. He says, I will not waste time like this with you. He took 3 javelins in his hand, thrust them into the heart of Absalom while he was still alive in the oak. And then 10 young men, Joab's armor bearers, surround Absalom, strike him down and kill him. Joab blows the trumpets. The troops come back from pursuing. Joab restrained them, and they took Absalom and threw him into a pit in a forest and raised over him a very great heap. Yeah, I mean, listener, sometimes if you hear this and you're like, what did he say, pit? And then he said Joseph. It's all intentional. Like, these stories are weaving together themes and narratives in a way that only one common author could possibly do it. And that is the beauty and testimony to the inspiration of God's word. Like, there's so many things in Absalom's story that are like bop, bop, bop. And it's almost like the person who wrote Samuel is writing jazz with these old-fashioned, old-timey Hebrew stories. And it all comes into play with this Absalom guy who learns no lessons from his brother and overthrows his dad. And it ends up getting him killed because his dad's commander is like, no, we're done running around in these hills. I've heard the stories about how long David's willing to run away from kings. We're done with it. Bop kills him. We're on with life. It says,
Hunter.
Yes.
in regards to narrative theory and the connections, like what you were talking about, when in the Bible there is some connection, it's very rare that the Bible gives specific details about a person, like his long hair. It's very rare that a person's hair is mentioned. And it's purposeful in the sense of kind of calling back to that, because often they're using that to inform something about the current story. It's either something similar to a past story, like Samson with the long hair, or it's trying to invert or create some sort of irony with that. So there's lots of design in these connections where it's helping to inform the current story by using previous stories to add meaning to stuff.
Yeah. Yes, 100%. It sounds cliche, listener. It's not. To say that the Bible is truly my favorite book. And I don't just say that because, like, Jesse and I talk about the Bible. I do attempt to read my Bible daily. I will confess. Sometimes I miss it. But this type thing, again, I've read Absalom's story before, and I kind of get the glossy-eyed, like, what is that name? Every time. And so this time, I was like, no, I'm going to buckle down. And even in talking through it, Jesse saw it. I got lost. Listener, I'll probably edit some of it out, where I'm like, oh no, there's 40 billion Hebrew names on this page, and I can't remember which of them was the lady that did the thing. Still couldn't find it. That said, like when Jesse says, oh, it brings up this long hair, I think of it as like a mid-story commentary. It is the author saying, I wish there was some way I could bundle up in a nice little package a core idea of how I want them to begin to think about something that's happening. I know what I'll do. I will highlight this aspect of Absalom. They could have highlighted a lot, but they, like Jesse said, they chose to say specifically, and his hair was long and he was strong. And go read Samson's story in Judges. Judges, I think, like 16. If you go look at Samson's story in Judges, dude had some pride problems. Dude also had some woman problems. Like, even on a surface level, we can begin to make these connections with Absalom. There's a lot. The fact that Absalom is thrown in a pit after he's dead, I truly, like, Joseph's thrown in a pit multiple times and isn't dead, like does not die as a result of those pit throwings. In fact, he dies of, my understanding, old age in Egypt, and then is carried back. Anyway, I'm Bible rambling now. But David finds out about Yes.
Oh, is there more to the story that you want to take?
The end of this is David finds out about Absalom's death.
Okay.
And where, many people would be like, oh, he's probably relieved that he didn't have to keep running. Yeah, his son is dead, but like about his son's death, which makes sense, except for his son is like the one that's trying to usurp the throne from him and cause this uprising. But David, even in this moment, is like, no, he grieves Absalom. And so the way it happens, he says, is it well, a man comes to him, he's named the Cushite. Okay. He comes to him and he says, good news for my lord the king. And the king says, is it well with the young man Absalom? And the Cushite answered, may the enemies of my lord the king and all who rise up against you for evil be like that young man. And the king was deeply moved and went to the chamber of the gate and wept. And as he went, he said, oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, would I have died instead of you, O Absalom, my son, my son. And so we see in here, David is a man of many flaws, but I do believe in this moment we see what is in some ways maybe not an explicit like presentation of a gospel, but the willingness of David to die instead of, if not on behalf of his son. Like he says, I wish that I were dead instead of you. It's intense paternal grieving as a father. And what's interesting is Absalom has no surviving sons. So he doesn't have any kids that can like take on, unfortunately, it turns out those concubines, here we are. But he did have a daughter whom he named Tamar. And it's like, now why'd you do that, bud? Named her after her aunt, I suppose. But it's Absalom. I am convinced that Absalom is, when you read like, oh, what is Absalom's story about? There's a lot of people that say it's a story about vanity and pride and anger and vengeance and all these things. And it is. But I believe and I am convinced that at the end of the day, it is a story about the lack of forgiveness. And I don't mean to downplay what awful things Amnon did. He did terrible, heinous things. But Absalom kills him, and it still didn't help. Like, yes, maybe justice was served on Amnon, but even sometimes when justice is served, that doesn't mean that forgiveness occurs. Forgiveness is a thing that happens often separate from justice. Now, justice can help. It can help us get to a place where we are there. But I believe Absalom, his biggest flaw is he was unable to forgive his brother and ultimately his father for what happened to his sister. And I'm convinced that that's why he names Tamar to try to keep that alive. It's like, yeah, like I want to keep your name going. Tamar did nothing wrong really in the story other than follow the king's commands, which would not have been viewed as wrong. It's a tragic story. Absalom, he gets about 6 chapters and he's king for a hot minute while his dad's in hiding. And yeah, it ends in death. Jesse, do you have any responses? I know we're pushing an hour. I really took a lot longer going into Absalom than I thought, but do you have any responses to that?
Yeah, I'll give my initial reactions that I was experiencing as you were telling the story. It has been a few months since I've read through Absalom's story, and it always catches me off guard each time I read it. As you detailed Absalom exacting revenge on his half-brother, I couldn't help but feel a sense of celebration, like, yeah. Mm-hmm. Because I think, I don't know how to really say this, but we'll just say it and let it fall where it lies. I guess I imagine the horrible act of rape to be much worse than murder, and that murder would be an applicable justice act against someone who raped someone else. And I don't really know if I believe what I just said, but the act of rape is horrible. And so in the story, when Absalom murders this person who did a very bad thing, I celebrated. Like, yeah, get him. And then as the story went on, I started rooting for Absalom as kind of like an underdog. Like, all right, yeah, overthrow David. He had his chance. Take the kingdom, do your thing. And then as the story progressed further and further, and we got to the concubines part, I was like, what are you doing? You were supposed to be better. You were supposed to exact justice on this horrible situation, and now you're doing the exact same thing. And so then my celebration started to wane, and more like, all right, David, come back. That was my unfiltered reaction to the story as you laid it out.
I'm trying to fact check something as you share that, because I believe that when the kingdom splits, I believe it is Absalom, one of Absalom's descendants, that helps play a role with that. I'm not confident on that. I thought I had read something in my research saying like one of Absalom's children played a role. And listener, if you're more acquainted with the story, feel free to shout at us. That is one of those things where I hope, if anything, listening to this, you will know that like we are learners too. And I learned a lot of things about Absalom's story in this. The one thing I do want to note about this, and I want to just read it. It's Leviticus 18:24. This is what God's law, and this would have been the law that David and Absalom and Amnon and all of them would have been under and subject to at their time, says what should happen to someone who does something like what Amnon did. It says, "Do not make yourselves unclean by any of these things, for by all these the nations I am driving out before you have become unclean, and the land became unclean, so that I punished its iniquity, and the land vomited out its inhabitants." In other words, people like the Geshurites, who, again, they practiced many of these things, and that's why God was using Israel to drive them out, who is Absalom's grandfather. These, don't be like them. That's always the key. "But you shall keep my statutes and my rules, and do none of these abominations, either to the native or the stranger who sojourns among you." So you don't get a free pass just because they're not Israelite. "For the people of the land who were before you did all these, lest the land vomit you out, and you make it unclean as the nations did before you. For everyone who does any of these, the persons who do them shall be cut off from among their people." And this is where we see David's failure in this. He didn't cut his son off. He kept Amnon around. He should have, as king, been objective on this and said, "Amnon, I love you, son, but God's word says that when we do these things, you have to go." And it probably would have spared Amnon's life if David had sent him away. I mean, there might have been a sense of justice for Absalom. At least he wouldn't have been near Absalom to have him be able to deal this blow to him. And it's like, but he says, "Keep my charge never to practice these customs when that were practiced before you, and don't make yourself unclean by them." And again, I'm gonna take a theological, biblical theology stretch here. David, in the coming chapters that follow this, takes up a desire to build God a temple. And in that, God says, not you, David, because you have blood on your hands. And I think that while, yes, he has blood on his hands because he was a man of war, I think some of the blood on his hands was blood such as Amnon's and Absalom's. I think that there's other types of blood that David never should have had on his hands. His unborn child, perhaps even, which is accredited to his infidelity and him killing Uriah the Hittite. And so, like, David has blood on his hands in many senses. And that's, like, within the story of David, that is a reality, that idea. And I think that David coming to grips with the blood on his hands, I really think it culminates in the person of Absalom. Like, this dude, it's messy. Like, you got two kids dead, and one whose life is forever changed and likely never will be the same. And your son Solomon, who is, I mean, by the time Solomon becomes king, he is not very old. So at this point in the story, he is like a baby growing towards like young middle childhood. And that's the kid that is going to be the king. Like, he probably saw and knew a lot of these things. Big brother Absalom and big brother Amnon. And, you know, his big sister Tamar. And it's like the dude, and then you see Solomon's life and his propensity for women, and it's like, good night. We're like, yes, I know that Rehoboam, Solomon's son, gets credited with dividing the kingdom, but boy, there's whispers, and there's you know, you can see it coming. And really, I really think in Solomon, it was like, is he going to get it? He's the wise king. You know, is he going to lock it down for us? It wasn't Amnon. It wasn't Absalom. But maybe it's this guy. And at first, it seems like it's going pretty well. And then it's not. I'm rambling again because the Bible is very neat. Absalom's story is tragic. It's a very frustrating story. It's a reminder of the importance of like justice and forgiveness. Yeah, Jesse, go ahead.
It also makes me feel weird as I read this story about other people, because it brings up in me questions about, like, I was rooting for him. Why? Why was I rooting for him? Why did I want this to happen? And it makes me become introspective of, like, where am I at? Like, as I read or listen to these stories of horrible things and how it turns out and how it plays out, and here I am, like, rooting for the underdog because I love stories and underdog stories are great. But then it's like, but I don't know. That sounds kind of like a Cain and Abel story, except a little different. And I don't know. It makes me think of maybe I should read this again by myself and take a look inside myself, seeing where, I don't know. The topic of rape is very sensitive to me. It gets me really riled up. The topic of murder, I don't know why, but not so much. And so I need to figure out what's going on with this story of Absalom and stuff there.
And I think, as it should, like, I think that's a topic that fires a lot of people up. So Jesse, this is I think the beauty of the Bible. We've moved from Absalom to now we're going to talk about why the Bible is really rad and good. This is, to me, and I'm convinced that this is the beauty of God's word, is when you hear this story, there is aspects of it that, you know, fix in your brain, and you're like, man, though, like, and I think that's God's Spirit, the Holy Spirit. I think that's Him, you know, like, He is pushing you into that so you can explore it. When I read this story, Jesse, I'm going to tell you, while yes, I am frustrated by Amnon's decisions, I watch David fail as a dad. Mm-hmm. And like, that's the part that I lock in on, because, and that is, I'll just share, in many ways related to the work that I do at the high school and the work that I used to do in Salem. Dude, I have seen so many fathers blow it. Like, and I'm just like, I wish I could just hand them this story and say, you got to do the hard stuff for your kid. Like, you have to. While yes, it sucks to discipline your child as an adult and send them packing because of what they've done, I am truly convinced that God's word would have spared 2 men's lives if it had been followed. Like, I do believe that. And, I mean, and if Amnon had been following it, he wouldn't have done what he'd have done. It's just this, all of them as sinners is a reminder that, like, God gave these commands, and while, yes, we're under a new covenant, that doesn't mean that these commands are bad. Like, there is good wisdom in them that in many ways we can and ought to follow. And God didn't give them just to be like, well, I want you to be bored and have a terrible, miserable time on this planet. He gave them as very good principles and guidelines to help us have a good and flourishing life on this planet. And it's like, they just missed it. I mean, yeah, and I mean, even you go back to Joshua failing to do what God told him to do, drive them out. Here we are, like, hi, I'm going to go hang out with Grandpa. He got to stick around in the land, so he's not too far away. I'm just going to go there and stir myself up. It's like, this God and Sinners project, every single time like, what's the value of sitting here talking about sin and sinners? It convinces me of, like, the goodness of God and the rightness of his word. Like, it just makes sense. And I want to note, it doesn't say, hey, when somebody does an awful, terrible thing like raping their half-sister, just slap them on the, like, it says cut them off, exile them from the community. They were as good as dead to the people. And I think the only reason that they weren't killed, because God does call for the killing of people in some of his laws, I think the only reason that they would not be put to death is because, in the sense of, like, an eye for an eye, while yes, it probably ruins that person's life, and in their culture, unfortunately, I think it had less of a stigma to it. They were less worried about how the women felt after, many times. At least the people were. God doesn't seem to be. He seems to be pretty concerned with them. But all that to say is like, because they're still alive, God's like, yeah, you're ostracizing the person that did this, though. Like, you do not communicate, contact, anything with them. And that's challenging, because then, Jesse, we get this fun moment where it's like, okay, now as Christians, how much of these, like, do not associate are good principles for us when we know of people that, you know, it's like, it's tough. And Paul's got a lot to say about it. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like we had this conversation and I'm walking away with more to like, with more questions and more like wanting to learn a bit more than I usually do. I usually come in and we have it and we talk and it's like, oh yeah, that was good. Like I can see that and I feel that. And this one leaves me frustrated and wanting, I don't know. I don't know exactly what. Any last thoughts, Jesse, before we close? We are...
I resonate with you. I am frustrated. I have more questions than we started with. And I'm also a little concerned about my reaction to this story. But I think it's human.
I think it's human, and I think it's valid. Like, I think part of it as good literature... Sorry, I'm not sitting very good for good audio. There we go. I'm lounging. I think part of it as a good story is it subverts our expectations, and it subverts our sense of justice a little bit in the moment. Yeah. You know, it plays with that. And for me, that just is like, sin is incredibly messy. Like, even sin affects how we perceive justice to be good. And because, I mean, they waste no amount of papyrus or whatever detailing that David is a really good guy. Like, they try to get you in on David's side by the end. They're like, oh, he's wailing for his son. He would rather die than his son. I mean, they're selling it on David.
Yeah.
But again, I'm like, no, but if David had just stepped up, nobody maybe would have had to die. And then I'm an overthinker, so then I play the what if game, which doesn't help. But I feel that, Jesse, and I think it's valid. Listener, if you also read the Bible and you arrive at places and you're like, man, though, I don't know how I feel about that, that's okay. Struggle with it. Be okay with that feeling and just struggle with it. I think God can accomplish a lot as we do so. Well, cool. Jesse, do you want to say goodbye to people this time?
Yeah, I can.
Okay.
Everybody, thank you for joining us, and I hope that this conversation or this discussion that Hunter and I have had have been illuminating for you. Maybe the story of Absolom has been a new adventure for you to listen through. And it, as Hunter and I have just talked about, it is a frustrating, introspective, causing story. And if you are also in this place of frustration with Hunter and I, welcome. We are all here together. I wish you well. Thank you for being with us. We will catch you in the next episode.
Bye, all.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Pickled Parables. If you enjoyed this message, please rate us, subscribe, and share with your friends. If you're interested in more things like this, check out our secondary podcast called My Dusty Bible. To stay up to date with all things Parable, follow us on Instagram at Parable_Ministries and visit our website at parableministries.com. Parable is a volunteer organization, and we would deeply appreciate your prayers. Thank you for joining us today. We'll catch you later.